How's it going? Adam Drake here, and today we're going to talk about clutch tuning and different clutches that are on the market. So first we'll talk about some of the more popular clutches and also the clutches that I use for Nitro Buggy and Nitro Truck. So nowadays there's a lot of good clutches on the market. The ProTech clutch is very good, the Mugen clutch is good, the OS clutch is good. All three of those that I just mentioned are all 4-shoe clutches and the more popular clutches on the market, and also the clutches that I use. You can use any of those clutches for buggy and truck. I personally prefer to use the ProTech clutch for buggy because it's a little bit smoother. Also, the Mugen clutch is very similar in terms of performance to the ProTech clutch. And then the OS clutch for truck because it's a little bit more aggressive, gives a little bit more acceleration. But the main focus of this video is to talk about the different tuning options with these clutches. So with all the different clutch options I just mentioned, the Mugen, the OS, and the ProTech, you have many options with different springs as well as materials and compounds of shoes. So I want to just kind of give a little general feedback or breakdown to make sure that you properly tune your clutch, because you really need to make sure that your clutch is performing properly, or you're going to struggle with tuning your engine. If your clutch is working properly, your engine tuning window is going to be a little bit more broad and you're going to be able to produce more power. And what I mean by that is if your clutch is sprung too stiff, or if you're running shoes that are too hard and the clutch just slips really bad, it's going to feel like the engine's not accelerating because it's slipping. Just like in your real car, if you're not able to fully release the clutch but you're revving the throttle, it's not going to accelerate as hard. It's also going to create more heat. It's going to narrow your tuning window. The opposite of that could be that the clutch is either sprung too light, or the shoes are too heavy or too abrasive in a sense. And what I mean by that is if the clutch is engaging too early, or there's not any slip at all, or very little slip, it's going to lug the engine down and also make it accelerate really slow, but it's going to have a much different sound. So if the clutch is what we call heavy, it's going to actually bog the engine down. If the clutch is slipping, you're going to hear the engine rev without having the most acceleration. So there's different theories on this. Some people will tell you, or even some of the guides that come with the clutch will say all aluminum is going to be the most aggressive or have the most acceleration. And that's not always true. And the reason for that is if you're running all 4 aluminum shoes, it can, depending on the engine, the amount of power, and also the amount of grip on the track, it can actually kind of bog the engine down, because with tuning your clutch, it also comes or brings into play the amount of traction you have, because if you're on a really high bite track to where your tires are not slipping or spinning, it puts more stress and load on the engine and also the clutch. So if you're on a low grip track, the clutch isn't as important as far as making the engine happy, because you have something slipping. You have the tires spinning and slipping. But when the grip is really high, or if you're running truggy, where you have more tire and surface area, if you have a lot of grip, you have very little wheel spin, and then you're running a clutch like an all aluminum clutch, it's actually going to lug the engine down and reduce acceleration. So that's where you'll see a lot of guys, they run 2 carbon and 2 aluminum shoes. And some people will say, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, carbon's going to slip more. How can it accelerate better with 2 carbon and 2 aluminum versus all aluminum, and it's what I just mentioned. So with all aluminum, it can actually bog the engine down and can actually reduce acceleration. By running 2 carbon shoes, and in some cases, drivers like Mayfield and Truggy, sometimes he'll just run 1 carbon shoe, and it's just to give the clutch just enough slip that it makes the engine happy. So it's at that balance of like, you don't want excessive slip, but you don't want it to lug the engine down. So I prefer the 2 carbon, 2 aluminum setup, especially for buggy, because it's kind of like riding a dirt bike and feathering the clutch on the exit of a turn. The carbon shoe allows just enough slip to keep the engine happy and the RPMs accelerating at a constant rate. And then you have the 2 aluminum shoes that are locking up to the bell and allowing it to have the drive and acceleration. So something definitely to play with. I don't think there's really any condition where you would want to run all carbon shoes because it would slip too much. You may want at times to run all aluminum. Sometimes we'll even run all aluminum to actually smooth out the acceleration and not make it quite as snappy and aggressive on bottom. But for me, the best of both worlds is the 2 carbon, 2 aluminum setup. And then the other thing that you can tune and play with the clutch is obviously the clutch springs. So same thing goes with the springs. You want to run springs that are soft enough to engage the shoe, get the car or truck accelerating, but not so soft that it's lugging the engine down. So with the 2 carbon, 2 aluminum setup that I usually run, I usually will run a split in the spring. So because the carbon shoe slips slightly more, I'll use 1 step softer clutch spring. So like with the ProTech clutch, I'll run 0.95 springs, which ProTech just recently released, on the carbon shoes. And then I'll run 1.0 springs on the aluminum. So what this is doing is allowing the carbon shoe that slips a little bit more to engage slightly earlier to get the car moving, to start to create the grip. And then as you get deeper into the throttle and the RPMs go up, then later and again, this is like split second, that this is happening, but then the aluminum shoe engages and that gives the full acceleration and drive of the 4-shoe clutch. So just wanting to share clutch tuning, some of the setups and things that I run, and give you my perspective on how I tune my clutch and what I'm listening for when I'm running either my truck or my buggy.